Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's edition of the Aurum podcast, where we discuss everything that regards building winning teams. I'm your host. My name is Tony Kuria, and I'm so glad that you could take your time to join with us today. The Aurum podcast is hosted by Aurum Consultants, a human resource and risk advisory company based here in Nairobi, Kenya. And we endeavor to help businesses, whether it's SMEs, whether it's corporates, whether it's NGOs, anyone in business and managing and having people working under them to be able to manage their teams, to manage their human capital in the most optimum way possible. Now, with me are two of my uh, colleagues who help me dissect these matters very well. First and foremost is Zipporah Kuria, the Managing Director of Aurum Consultants. Welcome, Zippy.
Good morning. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this morning.
Yes, and thank you, Zippy. And with us also is the consultant for the consultants, Martha Thuku, the HR specialist. Welcome, Martha.
Good morning, viewers, and welcome to our podcast. I want to thank you for listening to us, and I also want to encourage you as I speak about where I work. Now we are after elections. I learned we got peaceful elections, but when you dissect that piece, some people are quiet, not because they are happy, but because they are hurting. And because of that, I would want to introduce LVCT Health to you because we have solutions to take through your staff, those who need the service in matters mental health. We have a vibrant mental health program, and we are helping organizations support their staff in just going through this season of post-election and what the people are going through. So, should you have such an issue, please reach out to Oram Consultants. They'll be in touch with me as I link you up with our able counselors to take you through that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha. That indeed is a very good point that you brought up. Issues regarding human capital, the well being of human capital. Yes, as I have stated in earlier podcasts, this month of September, we have been discussing workplace compliance. We have been dissecting this aspect of workplace compliance from every aspect. And as I've said, this is a very wide topic. I mean, we can spend from the next one, I don't know, up to December probably. The next at different aspects of workplace compliance. Today, we want to look at workplace compliance best practices. There is what you do, and there is what you could do at its optimum. For example, if you're wiping the floor, you could wipe the floor casually, but you could also wipe the floor in the best way possible, using the best chemicals, using water that is fresh, using a mop or a brand new mop, using a technique here, there, everywhere. There are different ways you could be able to do a simple act of wiping the floor. There is the best practice in doing something in everything that we do. And therefore, we want to look in the workplace, we want to look at what are the best practices that we can carry out. Because as you know, employers today are faced with complex and ever-changing landscape of regulations and contractual and compliance obligations. Now, keeping up with these changes can be daunting, especially for small and medium-sized enterprises that may not have enough resources or adequate resources. So we want to look into selecting and implementing the best policies and practices for workplace compliance. So Zippy, this is a topic I know we here at Aurum Consultants really champion. So the question is, what is compliance best practice?
Thank you, Anthony, for that good question. And compliance, I think, like you're saying, is a very wide topic, and we can talk about it for a long time. And when we're looking at compliance, and especially regulatory compliance, I would say it's essential for any business person running a business or operating a business to be aware of their obligations in terms of their business, in terms of the industry they're operating on. It can be a very challenging, a very um, it can be challenging in terms of just understanding what do I need to do, how do I implement this, and a lot of times because of the different changes in the regulatory framework, sometimes as business people we end up getting caught up and don't understand what I'm required to do, and we only realize that when we are either slammed with penalties or when we have audits coming from the government entities and we start wondering, okay, what am I supposed to do? A lot of times we start looking at it and thinking about how complex it is, or how there's too much red taping in doing business and there's too much regulatory to just running a business. But the truth is, it's important for you to run a business when you're running a business to understand your industry, to understand what is the expectation. And I would say one of the things that you need to know is your industry regulatory environment. You will realize the industry we are in, like consultancy, will probably not be require the same compliance levels as someone in the retail industry or someone in the manufacturing industry. So other than the blanket kind of regulatory requirements, you need to understand your own industry and what is required of you to run that business without any challenges. Of course, the other thing, and we've talked about this before, is make sure you're creating effective policies and procedures, and not just creating them to stay in the shelves. You need to create these policies, you need to create these procedures, and you need to make sure your people understand them, they are aware of them, and they're able to follow through. And this is where you realize we actually come up with what we call SOP, standard operating procedures. A lot of times you're coming up with these things because you need to realize the importance of having to implement. When you find there are no SOPs and policies are there, sometimes it becomes a challenge actually to implement the same. The other thing, of course, when you put these things in place, is hold employees accountable. But you can't hold employees accountable if you have not trained them. So it's important for you to actually do compliance training for your employees. Let them understand these are the expectations. Let them understand this is how you operate, this is how you behave, this is how you handle issues that come that actually touch on areas that require compliance. Let's look at, for example, the retail industry. You are handling food. What is required of you? You're supposed to put on PPEs. You're supposed to put on gloves, the hairnets. You're supposed to put on boots and all those kind of things, aprons and all that. How do you walk into the manufacturing area? Who is allowed in that area, who is not allowed, what happens when there's an accident. So again, making sure employees are trained and they understand those things. And once you train them, then it becomes easy for you to actually start holding them accountable. And how do you hold them accountable? Of course, like I've said, you train them and put the measures in place and make sure this implementation. The other thing I would think about is, of course, you need to track violations. So when you're holding people accountable, you need to see, are there violations happening to any policies or any procedures that have been put in place? And if those violations are happening, what is the problem? Is it a lack of understanding? Is it carelessness? What's the issue? And understand those issues. Of course, again, conduct audits regularly. And we always keep on talking about audits. I think when we started this podcast this month, we were talking about audit and HR audit specifically as a part of your compliance. But you need to extend your audits to other areas. Audits in finance, we always do because KRA will expect you to do your audits. But are you doing your safety audits? Are you doing, all other audits that are, related to the business that you're running? So I think there's a lot that we can be able to do to make sure there's compliance in our workplaces. Back to you, Anthony.
Okay, okay. Thank you, Zippy. Those are very good points that you've raised. The basic things, just basic things. I mean, if you're listening to us and you run a business, or you're a GM, you're a manager in whatever area, what Zippy is saying is very basic stuff. Find out, okay, I am in, for example, you have probably you're running a service industry, probably you're manufacturing stuff. take time to ask yourself, what is the minimum requirement in the industry that I am in? And how can I make sure that I am effective in it? But before I continue talking too much, Martha, what's your take in regards compliance best practices?
Thanks, Anthony. And I like Zippy's input. Indeed, regarding compliance best practices. And for me, when I hear the word best practice, what comes to mind is a word we learned, especially when we were doing our management courses. Um, in in the service industry, we used to have this word called competitive advantage.
Mm,
And so when I think about best practice, I think of the set of procedures that you set to yourself or your
mm,
organization towards superior business performances. And
mm,
so, and one of the best practices is compliance, like having compliance in your organization. So, like, if because we are a HR consultancy, if we talk about
yes,
HR, so compliance in best practices, then you first of all have to put activities that support your organization in reaching competitive advantage in comparison with other organizations. And then now, once you have that, and Zippy came out very clearly where she said that the systems, the policies, the practices, the SOPs, what you do day to day is meeting a competitive advantage. And you know, when you say competitive advantage, meaning you are comparing yourself with your comparators within your industry. And so,
yes,
so the basics of an organization towards compliance is the law. But then there are those organizations that have decided to stand out. And so they put policies that are higher than the law. And so anything you're inputting, you are geared towards that. And because of that, then you are at a competitive advantage against your comparators. So then people will be, so you'll be using that if you have an audit department, like Zippy has said, they'll be auditing. You'll be compliant to what you have already put for yourself. And that's why it is good to stretch. Most organizations try, but because of financial intricacies, then they are not able to do so much. But for you to stand out, maybe you need to put in some money, because once you put these things in place, then you'll be measuring your compliance against what you have put. So, best practice compliance is to stretch and then to make sure what you have put in place, the policies, the procedures, you are auditing them to ensure that you are in compliance with whatever it is you have put, so that you remain at that competitive level. Thank you.
thank you, Martha. Thank you, Martha. Thank you for both you and Zippy have brought us uh, a simple yet clear analogy of what it means with best practices. Because at the end of the day, uh, in every aspect of a company's operations, best practice is what should be aimed for. And as we said when we were introducing, sometimes business people, even corporates, you'll find the array of regulatory compliance required is very wide, depending also on the industry you are in. But especially in regards to workers, there's certain commonalities that are there. They're very basic. For example, safety in the workplace, obviously, hiring right. Obviously, if it means releasing people, you also need to release them procedurally. And then there comes now, depending on the industry, there are certain things that you must make sure you comply with, things to do with safety and safety in the workplace and all that. So I like the fact that both you and Zippy have given us a taste of what that means. But now, let me build on that, Zippy, and bring the second thought in mind. What makes a good compliance system? What's your take on that?
To me, Anthony?
Yes, yes, yes. I want you to give us your view. What makes a good compliance system?
Thank you, Anthony. I think that's an interesting question. And again, just to build up on what we've just talked about, when you're looking at compliance, a compliance system, I would first say compliance is an ongoing process, and guidelines must be implemented to make sure the requirements are met. There's compliance from an area of regulatory, and there's compliance from an area of best practices for your business, and you're wanting to make sure you are doing your best to give your customer the best product possible. And like mothers mentioned, you need to see what are your competitors doing and whether you can be able to actually do much better than they are doing. So I would say you need to think about what you need to create around your systems or in around your compliance department to make sure it's an ongoing process and guidelines are being met. The other thing I would think about is who is responsible to spearhead this, because we can talk about compliance, but no one is there to drive the process. When no one is particularly clear about this is my responsibility to spearhead, or employees understand actually this is a department that is responsible to spearhead compliance, then what happens? You put in a lot of systems, a lot of policies, a lot of mechanisms, and you realize then it's just hair talk. You're not implementing anything. It's hot air. You're not it's not effective for your business. So I think it's important for you to also decide who is going to be responsible to spearhead and oversee compliance within the organization. Some organizations will go ahead and actually employ compliance officers or compliance managers. When I look at the banking industry, for instance, they have a whole department on compliance, and this is a department that makes sure they are actually checking different systems for for their business. And I would think it's a good practice for any business to have someone who can actually check and foolproof the systems that you have in place. Are they being followed? Are there any gaps that are arising? The other thing I would think about is who are the actors? Who is responsible? Who gets involved? Do we have the board of directors getting involved, and at what level? Do we get the top management getting involved when we are talking about the compliance mechanisms? Do we have the employees coming on board? Do we have customers? What is the level of responsibility when it comes to customers? A customer is coming and you have a construction site. What is their responsibility in that area for you to ensure people are not getting hurt or they're not getting injured while they're coming to your business? So you need to also identify who are the different actors and what are their responsibilities and whether they're informed. The other thing I would think about having a good system, you need to have a feedback, whether it's employees and whether it's customers. You need to have a way of getting feedback where there are challenges or when things are working, so that you know what areas need to be improved. I always say when you don't get feedback, you always think you're doing your best, and sometimes you can become outdated. So feedback is very important, and you need to create that mechanism of being able to get feedback. Of course, the other thing, you need to make sure you're addressing any gaps that arise on a continuous way, without letting things slip through. Sometimes this feedback is given and it just becomes something that sits in the shelves and we don't do anything about. Um, I'm just thinking, for instance, like in the HR department, when an employee is leaving an organization and they do an exit interview and they give you feedback, valuable feedback, some of it probably criticizing the organization, not in a bad way, but because there are gaps that they have been able to see. What are we doing about that feedback? So it's important to know we've been given feedback, we've created the mechanism for feedback, and we've gotten this feedback. Then what do we do? How do we use that feedback to address the gaps that arise in a professional way and in a way that it helps the organization? So I would think we need to think about as an organization and in our industry, what kind of a compliance system do I need to put in place? What do you call it? Maybe I need to have a checklist in terms of our compliance mechanism, so that I know this area has been handled up to what extent and by who. So again, creating systems and processes around it, but above it all, there has to be some sort of accountability where you are able to say, this is a person who is responsible, this is what they're supposed to be doing. And if they don't do, then what is the repercussion of not following those processes that you're putting in place? So I would put it like that in a very simple and short way. Back to you, Anthony.
Wow. Thank you, Zippy. That is very clear. That is very systematic, very clear. In brief, Martha, what's your take when it comes to a good compliance system?
Yes, so as I add briefly on what ZP has shared, um, so Tony, we have been talking about many things in HR, and my thoughts, the initial thought that comes up in every area of a HR system is the culture of the organization. So even as you start your SME, you need to kind of have an idea of what kind of culture you're going to implement, because it's that culture that will be able to expand to suit in all these good things that you want to
Mm,
do. Some are written, some have them in their mind, but what they are practicing is different. So the culture needs to be checked. And then now every organization needs to have a strategy, the,
mm,
the and you know the blueprint of where are you going, so that even when you are setting these other things, then the strategy comes first, and then you ensure that you have written policies and procedures, and Zippy even added the word SOPs. So once you have that in place, and then train them to train all the staff, train every stakeholder in your organization concerning the way we do things here, so that they are aware, and they also have the written ones, and you make sure that they are aware, and if they need to give you feedback, like Zippy has said, then you also have that the open door policy to help feedback on your policies and procedures. So when people are trained, they are also able to see the gaps, because you don't know it all.
mm,
And then now, once you have done all that, it's good to have a compliance officer, or
mhm,
you can have a consultant. So compliance comes in to check these things you have set for yourself, your policies, your procedures. Are they
mm,
working? And you know, when you set these policies and procedures, first of all, you have checked in the market, you have done your SWOT analysis, you've done everything, and you have decided where you would want to be in the market as far as your industry is concerned. And you remember we talked about competitive advantage. So everything you're doing is to ensure that you have competitive advantage
mhm,
against your competitors. So once you
mm,
have done that, and then you have a compliance officer, because as ZP has said, even if you have them written, who is driving these compliance checks? If you don't
Correct.
have someone who is driving the compliance checks, everything you have done will be futile, because as an MD, a CEO, a director, you don't have time to keep checking these small things. And
Mm,
then once you have a compliance officer, then this person will keep you in check. And you will say, our policy says this, but in HR department, the way they are practicing is not correct. And so the
mm,
compliance officer will always be acting like a mirror to every department to ensure
mhm,
that they are guided by the policies, their operations and their SOPs, and the practices on the ground are guided by the policies and the procedures you took. I once participated in an organization where we wanted to be ISO certified. And,
mm.
and when the ISO means what, Tony? International Standards something.
Organization, yes.
Yeah. And when the ISO people came, I realized they were actually checking our practices and policies and
Mm,
seeing whether we have them, then
mhm,
are we practicing them on the ground? So the people who were being interviewed were not us in management. They were
mm,
interviewing the people in there who are actually meeting the clients.
mhm,
So they will check how they are operating against um, the
The set
policies
guidelines, yes.
and the set guidelines. Have we been complying? Can we say we can be ISO certified? So
Mm-hmm.
it was a very interesting process, and it opened up my mind, and maybe that's why I became. I'm very structural. I like policies and procedures. I like structures because I find an organization works better where there are structures, policies, and procedures, and they are being followed. Then, once you have done that, then you have also an internal monitoring and evaluation, audit checks. And that's why I have said you need to have a compliance officer, or then you need to look into hiring a consultant like Oram who can come and be checking what you are doing. And the good thing with the auditors and compliance officers, mostly they will work with the people on the ground. They will not work with the managers. So
Mm-hmm.
that's a good compliance system. You will find yourself at a balance, and you'll be able to know whether your best practices you're offering are organizations reaching out to you to guide them on the best practices that you have, because you have it so well done, and the compliance officer is giving you reports on what is happening on the ground, and where there is something that needs to be done, you're acting on it, you're not sleeping over it, and you're
Yes.
making things even better. Thank you very much. That's what I can contribute.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. If you're out there, you've just heard it from an expert. You've just heard it from a HR specialist. That systems, processes are very key to getting your business on track. And you do not need to be a very big company, a very big organization to have systems and processes and having compliance put in place. No, 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 no. Just the same way in your house, there is a probably a procedure when if somebody knocks at the gate. Let me remove the complications from this thing. For example, if you're living in your house, somebody knocks at the gate or at the door of your house. Depending on where you stay, at a certain hour only so and so should open the house. At this hour, the baby should be drinking. Those are systems and processes. So bring that to your business. Do you have a process, a system, a way, a procedure that first of all meets the government requirements, and then now internally, as Martha earlier said, and I think it's also Zippy also said, issues issues regarding using compliance, using compliance to build on your culture. Okay, so those are things that have been said. And Martha and Zippy, really, you've whetted my appetite. I'm just listening. I'm thinking, wow, this one. I'm sure our listeners and our viewers are thinking, wow, if you are running a business, if you're running a department, if you're a HR, if you are in accounts, if you're running a small business, whatever it could be, already here you're being told how to, in especially when it regards to people and processes. Unfortunately, our time is really gone. I would have loved to ask more questions. I had a few more questions in mind, which I believed our viewers and listeners would have loved to have answered, but our time is really gone. And if you're out there and you're wondering, okay, you guys, like Tony has just said, this thing sounds like wow. I would like to know more. Well, you can always get in touch with us. Our contacts are at the bottom of your screen, via WhatsApp, via social media platforms, with LinkedIn, with YouTube, with Facebook, and even through our website, www.rmconsultants.co.ke. You can get in touch with us if you'd like to know more how to meet compliance. Probably you're having compliance challenges when it comes to safety in the workplace, when it comes to statutory regulations, when it comes to things like trainings, when it comes to things like you're having issues, workers are leaving you or they're quitting and they're suing you and you're wondering, where am I going wrong? Get in touch with us. We can help you put in place processes and systems within your company and line them up in a manner that both from a regulatory perspective, from our staff perspective, HR perspective, you're getting yourself in place. And even from there now, you build on your company culture. Use that to build on your company culture. And as Mother said, you gain yourself a strong competitive advantage. Ladies, thank you, Martha. Thank you, Zippy, for the time that we've had here. We will wrap it up next week, next Saturday. We will wrap up this issue of workplace compliance next week. So make sure 9 a.m. on Saturday you're with us. We will wrap it up. We will not be in a hurry. We'll probably take about an hour or so where we can discuss these things in depth. You can always send questions. If you are listening to this podcast and it's after hours after we have gone through YouTube, after we have finished our live sessions and you have questions, kindly send them. We always love tackling questions the next time we are on air. So, having said that, Martha, thank you. Zippy, as usual, thank you very much. Let's meet next week, same time, same place. God bless you.